Hello, Bookstagram. All right, so you notice this giant stack of diplomatic and military history books. I'm going to try to talk about all of them, but I'm going to do it in two parts, all right? So otherwise this video would be crazy long. So my aim here is to give you my basic impressions of every single one of these books across two parts. These are overwhelmingly narrative kind of survey history books. Some are more thematic. They're all kind of overall, or almost all are kind of overall, kind of like I said, kind of bird's eye view studies of diplomatic history, military history, largely with a sort of Western/European focus, although there are some exceptions to that. All right, so let's begin. First up, one of these very short introductions, The Cold War by Robert McMahon. One thing I loved about this one that I remember is that it really did a good job of sort of setting the scene for the Cold War, so to speak. So kind of looking at the foreign policy outlooks and the various motives of the West versus the USSR and the communist world more broadly. And so with these books, I mean, I'm sure you've probably come across them. You've probably read at least one yourself. They do a really good job of just getting the absolute basics across. Usually, they'll have charts, pictures, maps, kind of insets like this. For example, in the Truman Doctrine, they're really just great at they do what it says on the tin, so to speak, right? They will give you an excellent single volume introduction to a really complex topic. Okay, in this case, the Cold War. All right, moving on. The Shortest History of War by Gwyn Dyer. So, as you can see from the subtitle, From Hunter-Gatherers to Nuclear Superpowers, a retelling of our times. All right, so this is, in this volume, Gwyn Dyer attempts to basically tell the entire history of warfare. Very formidable task. So, let's take a look at the table of contents. You can see he begins here, origins of conflict, or origins, how combat works, and then the evolution of battle, beginning with 3500 BC, all the way up through sort of the rise of the city-states of the classical antiquity, the rise of absolute monarchy and dynastic warfare in Europe, the balance of power, transitioning into mass warfare, total war, and then kind of ending with sort of nuclear warfare, conventional warfare, and kind of modern asymmetrical warfare as well. This was a great book. I love this one. I freaking love this one. It was it's given what he's trying to do, he really does an extremely good job with it. It is very clearly written. It's a very readable book, the kind of book you can get through in just a couple of sittings. Plenty of he'll use kind of infographics frequently as well, which can be extremely useful for clarifying, conceptualizing really detailed, complex ideas. You can see more of that here. All right, so he talks about how the 30 Years' War ultimately kind of evolved conceptually into a new concept of limited war. Absolutely loved this one. All right, moving on. War in European History, Michael Howard. This is from Oxford Press. This one, sort of in the same vein as the one we just looked at, except more limited in scope. This one, because it's obviously just European history. This one breaks down war into these really neat kind of conceptual chapters. So the wars of the knights, the wars of the mercenaries, the wars of the merchants, of the professionals, of the revolution, of the nations, of the technologists, and then the end of the European era. This one was a really fun read. Really kind of sort of tracing the rise of sort of professional, kind of late Renaissance, the kind of the rise of the new monarchies, professional standing armies, within a few generations of that, and then moving up all the way through you know, well, you saw the chapters into the age of nationalism, the effects that technology had, the rise of kind of levée-en mass warfare, that type of thing, all the way to the modern age. This one was really fun to read, and just does a really great job of. I love those conceptual chapters, the way it just broke it down into, you know, the wars of the merchants, the wars of the professionals, et cetera, et cetera. Really giving you like a framing theme for each major period in the evolution of European warfare. All right. Up next, sort of kind of in the same vein, actually, the Oxford History of Modern War. All right, so this is, as you can see, edited by Charles Townsend, and so it's a collection. It's a collection of sort of articles, basically, or each chapter is written by a different scholar. So part one, the evolution of modern war. And so he traces kind of like the book we just looked at, except in more detail, and of course with many different perspectives as well, which is interesting. The various kind of phases in the evolution of warfare up to, you know, total war. And then part two, and actually part one extends Cold War and then People's War, so sort of like asymmetrical warfare, sort of like peasant wars, peasant resistance, think Vietnam, that type of thing, Afghanistan. And then elements of modern war, and this is more where it gets into sort of the conceptual part of it, right? So technology in war, sea warfare, air warfare, women in war, so kind of like breaking down war by major themes. Another really good one. Right, up next, the Wars of the Ancient Greeks. Right, Victor Davis Hanson, you've probably heard this name before. He has produced a lot of material. Years ago, I read his A War Like No Other. I think that was the title. It was on the Peloponnesian War. And really enjoyed that one. He basically took Thucydides and sort of kind of piggybacked off of it and then added a lot of modern scholarship. So this is part of a series. I've seen a few of these, actually, the Smithsonian History of Warfare. And this is, I've seen one on like 18th century warfare. I've seen one on medieval warfare, etc. But so you can look at the table of contents here. It basically goes really from kind of archaic, the archaic period through classical up to the Hellenistic period of Greek warfare. There's also there's a really helpful glossary, notable Greeks at war, just a really solid kind of reference book. Plenty of images as well, charts, tables, these nice glossy pages as well. Yeah, this is just a solid introduction to, that was a cool map. Let's go back to that one. Let's see. What do we have here? Greek battles, 700 to 168 BC. All right, so lots of stuff like this. Full color, beautiful. All right, really like this one. All right, coming up on 8 minutes. Let's get through a couple more. 15 decisive battles of the Western world. I've not fully read this one, but from what I have read is really enjoyed it. So from Marathon to Waterloo, as you can see, this one is a really just a cool concept for a book, actually, just to focus on individual battles, and then to really delve into them in quite a bit of detail. So you can see I'm not going to read the full table of contents here, but you can take a look for yourself. Pause the video if you like. Moving on to the next one. All right, so from Marathon to Waterloo, right? Let's flip through it quickly. This one, I wish I could tell you more. I don't want to, I have not fully read it, but enough to have a really solid impression, so I don't want to say too much other than just it was a really great book and an interesting concept to look at warfare, the history of warfare through kind of these key battles and sort of like these fulcrum points of history that redefine the balance of power that redefined sort of tactics fundamentally, and moved us into like a completely different into completely different ways of thinking about warfare itself. All right, show you the back if you want to pause, take a look in more detail. But yeah, this one's a really great one. All right, let's do one more. The Rise of the Great Powers, 1648 to 1815. So some of you might know 1648, the end of the 30 Years' War, and then 1815, the final defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo. Right. This one is a what I like about this one is that it focuses, just like as you can see from the title, The Rise of the Great Powers. It picks this theme of looking at this period sort of from the perspective of the major nations involved. So there's a chapter on France, Britain, Austria, Russia. Talks about the the diplomatic revolution when everything kind of flipped and reoriented the power structure of the continent, and then going up through into the French Revolution and the rise of kind of levée mass warfare that you begin to see with the French Revolution / Napoleon. This one was just a solid introductory book on the told kind of from the perspective of the major powers, instead of just talking about sort of the events in the sort of in the abstract, like looking at it from the perspective of what the elites of each country were trying to achieve, to what extent they did or did not. All right, that concludes part one. As you can see, there's quite a bit more here. So yeah, I will see you in part two. Thank you for watching.